He was kicked off the plane without a single explanation, as if success and wealth meant nothing when your skin was black. They thought they could strip him of his dignity with their disdain and humiliations, unaware that their fates were already in his hands. When they saw him again a few weeks later, their faces paled with fear, for they had just lost everything. What he did next would shock even those who had seen it all. But let's start from the beginning. Subscribe to our channel and give us a like to support the fight against systemic racism and help spread these important stories to more people. Marcus Long was returning home after closing a major deal that had strengthened his company's position in the market. He was accustomed to business trips and had frequently used private airlines. Today, he was expecting an ordinary flight on a private jet and calmly arrived at the private terminal. Upon entering the terminal, Marcus was greeted by one of the airline employees, a middle-aged white man named Jack. His look was wary, and his expression seemed suspicious. Instead of the usual greeting, Jack immediately began asking questions. "Are you sure you've booked this flight? We don't often get clients like you." The tone was condescending, as if Jack doubted Marcus could afford a private jet. Marcus calmly explained that the flight had been booked in advance and that his name should be in the system. He presented his documents and ticket, but Jack, glancing at them with evident distrust, mumbled, "Wait there, I need to check everything." He headed over to a computer, and after a few minutes, he returned with another employee, a woman named Kate. Kate stood next to Jack and gave Marcus a quick glance, as if evaluating him from head to toe. "We checked your documents, but to be honest, something doesn't seem right," she said, pretending to study his passport carefully. "This amount of money doesn't usually belong to people like you," she remarked, barely hiding her contempt. Marcus felt his anger rising inside, but he kept his composure, not wanting to escalate the situation. "I often fly with your company," Marcus tried to explain, attempting to remain polite. "My documents are in order. My company paid for this flight weeks ago." But his words seemed meaningless to the employees. Jack sighed and said, "We can't allow just anyone to use our services. You have to understand that." The rising tension became apparent. Marcus realized this was not a routine check but pure prejudice. He was being humiliated simply because of the color of his skin. He could see it on the employees' faces and in their condescending remarks. The situation began to spiral out of control. Jack's words echoed in Marcus's mind. "Just stand yon." The anger inside him began to boil, but he tried to stay calm. He had faced this kind of discrimination before, but each time it struck at his dignity, as if all his life achievements were diminished simply because of the color of his skin. But this time, the situation felt sharper. He was being denied something that rightfully belonged to him. "I demand an explanation," Marcus said firmly, looking Jack directly in the eyes. "My documents are in perfect order. If there's an issue, let me speak with your management." Jack smirked. "I'm the management here," he responded with a slight grin, enjoying his position of power. Kate, standing beside him, nodded as if to back him up. She added, "We just want to make sure everything is clear. Nobody wants trouble on board." The subtext of her words was obvious, and Marcus sensed that they saw him as some kind of risk, purely based on his appearance. Marcus pulled out his phone, ready to call his lawyer, but Jack quickly intervened. "If you don't stop causing trouble, we'll have to call the police." It was an overt threat. Jack knew that using the police as a tool of suppression often worked against black people, especially when accusations of non-compliance were involved. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Marcus realized there would be no simple solution. He was being accused of something he hadn't done, and they were cornering him. Logic had given way to racial stereotypes and bias. Other terminal employees began gathering behind him, clearly curious about what was happening. "If this is a joke, it's gone too far," Marcus said coldly, putting his phone back in his pocket. He knew he had to be careful not to give them any reason to call the police, but he had no intention of surrendering. "This isn't a joke, mister. Whatever your name is." Jack deliberately avoided saying Marcus's last name, another sign of disrespect. "We can't let someone with a questionable background fly on our flight." Those words were the last straw. Marcus couldn't take it anymore and said, "It's not up to you to decide who's questionable here. This is your last chance to fix the situation, or you'll have to answer for it." He made it clear that he wasn't backing down, and it slightly shook the employees' confidence. But instead of stopping, Jack and Kate continued insisting on their stance. They confidently denied Marcus boarding the flight and told him he had to leave the terminal, or security would be called. The feeling of injustice overwhelmed Marcus, but he knew it was crucial to remain composed and come up with a different strategy. Under their condescending gazes, he gathered his things and slowly exited the terminal. As Marcus stepped out of the terminal, a storm was brewing inside him. He had experienced discrimination before, but this incident was especially humiliating. To be publicly shamed, despite all his achievements and status, was unbearable. But instead of succumbing to anger and despair, he decided to act. The moment he stepped outside, Marcus immediately called his lawyer. He calmly but firmly explained the details of the conflict and asked for all possible legal measures to be prepared. His lawyer, understanding the seriousness of the situation, assured him that they would deal with the incident and contact the airline's management. However, Marcus didn't plan to rely solely on legal proceedings. After speaking with his lawyer, Marcus reached out to one of his business partners, Matt, with whom he had recently closed a major deal. Matt was a large investor in the aviation sector and frequently participated in negotiations for buying and selling aviation assets. Marcus decided to tell him about what had happened. He presented the situation not only as a personal insult, but as an example of the systemic problem Black people face across all sectors, including light services. "You won't believe this," Marcus said over the phone, "but these people think they can treat anyone as a suspect just because their stereotypes dictate who can be a client of their company and who can't." Matt listened carefully and immediately suggested a meeting with potential partners who were looking for investment opportunities in airlines. A week later, Marcus and Matt sat at a meeting with representatives of a consortium that was considering purchasing the airline, the very one that had refused to serve Marcus. The deal was already in the final stages, and one of the company's directors, with whom Matt had been negotiating, mentioned they were interested in attracting new capital and seeking influential partners. Marcus realized this was a chance to change the situation. He offered his assistance in the form of investments and expressed his interest in joining the board of directors after the deal was finalized. His experience and connections in business were undeniable arguments in favor of his involvement. A few weeks later, the deal was officially concluded, and Marcus became part of the new management of the airline. For him, this was not just another business project. It was an opportunity to prove that injustice would not go unanswered. When news of the company's acquisition by new ownership hit the press, the airline's employees began to understand that their future could drastically change. Jack and Kate, who had recently humiliated Marcus, were stunned to learn that he was now one of the company's co-owners. Several weeks later, Marcus decided to once again use the services of the Verisame airline, which was now under new management. This time, everything was different. When he arrived at the terminal, new staff greeted him with respect and professionalism and escorted him to the plane. However, Jack and Kate, the former employees, were still working for the company, unaware of what awaited them. As Marcus entered the terminal, he immediately noticed Jack and Kate standing off to the side, visibly nervous. It was clear they were already aware of the change in leadership and suspected that their days at the company were numbered. But instead of punishing them outright, Marcus decided to use this moment as a lesson they would never forget. Approaching them, he looked Jack directly in the eye. "Do you remember me?" he asked calmly but with cold confidence. Jack swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. Kate averted her gaze, realizing the situation was slipping out of their control. "Last time, you questioned not only my identity but also my value as a human being," Marcus continued. "You humiliated me without any grounds other than your own prejudices. Today, I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to show you that every person deserves respect, no matter what they look like or how much money they have." Jack and Kate stood in silence, not daring to argue. They knew they would have to face the consequences of their actions, and indeed, the company's leadership had already made a decision. Both employees were fired for violating corporate ethics and engaging in discriminatory behavior. Marcos insisted that instead of punitive measures, training should be conducted for all employees to prevent such situations in the future. However, for Jack and Kate, this lesson came too late. They lost their jobs, but more importantly, they faced the consequences of their biased actions and realized that racism and discrimination come with a price. For Marcos, this wasn't just an act of justice. He not only corrected the situation for himself, but also changed the system to ensure others wouldn't face the same injustice. This victory was more important than any deal or profit. He knew it was only one step in a long fight for equality, but each step meant a lot. As he left the terminal, Marcos felt a sense of inner satisfaction. He had ensured that justice prevailed, not through revenge, but by reforming a system that had long kept him and other black people at a disadvantage. And that was the true triumph.